be made, but knowing that the elections will have to be held because the term expires, the current term will expire in 2024. I will deal with the background first. We all know, and it has been spoken about, since the judgment was given, we have been given the time to amend, or Parliament has been given the time to include independent candidates as candidates in the national and provincial election. The court has given a 24 months period for this to be effected. The timeline for the national and provincial elections in 2024, or to be held in 2024, comes shortly after the period in which the decision of Parliament, or the solution required of Parliament, would have been placed on the table. There are several stakeholders that will be affected, or who will have to help in this process. Parliament clearly leading the process. Political parties have to be working very closely, as Mr. Vali Musa pointed out. Civil society, we believe, are going to be very, very crucial to this process. There are many others, and then ourselves in that queue as well. If one looks at the key dependencies leading to the 2024 national and provincial elections, one will see that, or will remember that, the current Parliament was the elections for the current Parliament were held on the 8th of May 2019. The first sitting of this Parliament was the 22nd of May 2019. From this, you can clearly deduce that the 5-year period that, or the 5-year term, as we have in the Constitution, will in fact expire around the 21st of May, and therefore at the earliest from the 22nd of May 2024, an election must be held. If one looks at an election that must be held, then it is possible to hold it the earliest opportunity or within the 90-day period. If we hold that election within the 90-day period, we would be looking at around the 20th of August 2024. Normally, elections in South Africa are held on a Wednesday for many good reasons. We won't talk about them here today. We just don't have the time. So you would be looking more or less around the 14th or so of August in 2024. Clearly, we're not pronouncing on any dates. Prerogative is that of the president in terms of the Constitution. We just are painting pictures here. When we work with an election of, for example, 14 August 2024, one has to count about 86 days, and this is the minimum that the Commission will require to have the election timetable. In other words, proclamation of an election must take place probably 86 days or slightly above 86 days before the time. There are several dependencies that will lead to us getting to an election in 2024. The first is that we will need to adjust our systems. When we talk about an electoral system, we talk about operational systems that would work, that would be used in effecting that electoral system and the electoral infrastructure at the Electoral Commission. We will need to receive the final set of parliamentary and provincial legislature constituencies from the institution that would be legally mandated to demarcate such boundaries. We don't know if there will be constituency boundaries or not. But in the event that there is, there will be constituency boundaries. We can understand that there will be an institution tasked with that responsibility. Whether that institution exists today or not, it's not a matter that we know, because at the moment we don't have constituency boundaries for parliament and provincial legislatures. If they do, an institution evidently would have to be mandated to do such work. We then also will see the likelihood of boundaries that are demarcated to fit into the revised electoral system, where these boundaries may be required. And various pieces of legislation will need to be amended. There has been mention made. There are a number of pieces of legislation. The Electoral Act very clearly, one of those. The Political Party Funding Act, another. The Municipal Demarcation Act may have to be amended, or a new institution that demarcates. The Electoral Commission will also require a period of time. We anticipate that it is likely to be 12 months from the receipt of constituency boundaries to the election date, so that we are able to prepare ourselves to modify or overlay our systems to the new arrangements that would be made. In other words, our results systems for the national and provincial elections will have to reflect the new arrangements that we have made. Candidate nomination systems will have to deal with that. It may well be that we are dealing with different clustering of the infrastructure, and therefore our infrastructure must be adjusted to deal with that. The logistics information systems and many other systems that we use to conduct elections in the Republic. Adjusting voting districts will be necessary where constituency boundaries have been demarcated, to make sure that our voting district boundaries indeed accord with the new constituency boundaries that our country will be having. We will, as a consequence, also need to update the voters' roll by way of targeting persons that may have been affected by these changes and bringing them in line with the changes that have taken place in the electoral boundary or the constituency boundary determinations that may have been made. We will require extensive voter education. This will be a change that has to be communicated. We believe that civil society, ourselves, political parties, independent candidates, and everyone in society will need the time to understand this and to communicate how this impacts those citizens who are central, as Mr. Vali Musa has indicated, who will be central in this arrangement. Work on electoral systems is underway, as we have seen, and it may include constituencies or no constituencies. In this presentation, I will deal with both scenarios, because we don't know which scenario eventually will be before us. But it is assumed that an existing institution or a new institution may have to be established, which would require at least 18 months. Although, history tells us that this kind of things require up to 2 years, for the demarcation of constituency boundaries for Parliament and 9 provincial legislatures in accordance with amendments. Clearly, the extent to which this may need to be done is not a matter that I raise. It may well be that current boundaries may be useful extensively, and that would save time. But where there is extensive work that would need to be done, more time would be needed. If we look at scenario 1, which is a scenario that includes constituency boundaries. We will then see that what we need is that between or since the decision of the judgment of the Constitutional Court in June last year, Parliament has to be seized with the revision of the electoral system and amendments thereto. We've heard about this. We heard that the time is going to be kept, but as we understand, that period must fall between July 2020 and October 2021. And you will see why we say this, because if we are aiming for an election on the 22nd of May 2024, which is the earliest period that an election can be held after the expiry of the current term, then we have to work backwards, in that we have to say before the 22nd of May 2024, we need 86 days for the election timetable to kick in, which means proclamation must be made on the 26th of February 2024. If you then go back and say we need, before proclamation, to have looked at the registration of voters and have finalized the voters' roll, that would have to have been completed by the 3rd to the 4th of February 2024. If you then say, what are all of the things that we need to do, adjusting voting district boundaries to new constituencies, modifying electoral systems and operations, and revising systems that we use currently, one would then have to say that work must be completed between that period of May 2023 to October 2023. And once that has been done, it leads to a lot of targeted work and revisions and adjustments to the voters' roll, and giving citizens the opportunity to register in their correct constituencies. And that period between October 2023 and the 3rd and 4th of February 2024 is very crucial and central to that purpose. Then one has to say, if you then take back 18 months or so from May 2023 for the work that is required to have constituency boundaries demarcated and so on and so forth, that work cannot start later than November 2021 and must be completed by May 2023. That then leaves work that Parliament has to do, in our view, and we don't say it has to be completely so, but it is indicative of the time frames that we are running, which are tight. That means that the work that is done, amongst others, by the task team and Parliament would have to more or less be concluded by the end of October in this year. Of course, the scenario I spoke to looks at the 90-day period, the election being held early in the 90-day period. In other words, immediately after the expiry of the term. If we do hold it later, a period of 18 months between July 2020 to January 2022 becomes available to Parliament. I suspect this time may be very necessary because October 2021 is indeed very tight. If we look at scenario 2, where we exclude constituencies, or Parliament decides to revise a new electoral system that excludes constituencies, we still go back to an election that is going to be held on the 22nd of May 2024, which means proclamation still happens on the 26th of February 2024, which means that voter registration happens at the last opportunity on the 3rd or the 4th of February 2024. That, however, leaves the Commission to still require a year in which it would need to work on the electoral system, modifying electoral operation systems, in other words, ICT systems and all other systems that we use in the period between July 2022 and October 2023. And Parliament would have the opportunity of working between July 2020 and June 2022 to decide the electoral system. This accords with the time that Parliament would be required to have, there are 24 months within which they have to have a new electoral system on the table, and this provides Parliament with 23 months within which it would have done so. Both the exclusion of constituencies and the inclusion of constituencies do factor the fact that the time required by Parliament must fit in to the 24 months that the court has provided. Now, I want to conclude and point out a few things that arise from this painting of some time frames critical for the administration of the elections or the preparation of elections from where we are. The first one is that when we look at an election that must be held in May 2024, it does mean that whatever happens, once Parliament has decided an electoral system, we do not have more than 24 months to conducting that elections. So quite a lot of work will have to be done on the fly, even as we say so ourselves. The second thing that one must note is that a period of 15 months is available to Parliament to conclude this exercise from July 2020 to October 2021, assuming that the national and provincial elections for 2024 are conducted at the earliest possible date after the expiry of the term. However, if they are to be held within the expiry of the 90 days, but later in that window period, perhaps a bigger time window then becomes available to Parliament. Should Parliament decide on a revised electoral system that excludes constituencies, Parliament will be in a position to make use of the full period granted by the Constitutional Court. In other words, the 24 months to decide on a revised electoral system and amend the relevant legislation by June of 2022. In sum, what we are saying is that we acknowledge that this process is underway and is going to result in an electoral system that we would have to implement by 2024. We are saying that in the absence of a defined system, we postulate that there may be two scenarios, one that involves the introduction of constituencies and another that does not involve constituencies. In other words, it excludes constituencies. And we indicate how under either of those propositions we will get up to work and what each of the scenarios would hold for us. We conclude that Parliament, in fact, does have the time that it has been required to do this work in, as has already been confirmed by both the Minister, the Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, and indeed the Chairperson of the Advisory Committee on the Electoral Amendments. We want to pause at this point and thank you indeed for this opportunity to paint this picture. Thank you indeed, Chairperson.
No, thank you very much, Commissioner Musupi. Our last presentation is from Mr. Electoral, but note we're joined by Andres Nel. Andres Nel is a former deputy minister, a former leader of young people, and an activist in his own right, and an intellectual of our time. Thank you, Andres, for joining. We'll take Mr. Electoral's presentation.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to recognize Chairperson Advocate Bongo, Minister Motsoaledi, Deputy Speaker Tsenoli, and Chairperson Musa, MPs, colleagues. Sorry, let me turn my video on. I'm Joel Bregman from the organization My Vote Counts, and we are deeply honored to be given the opportunity to make a brief presentation to you today on the role of independent candidates in South African democracy. I'm joined by my colleague, Mr. Tlogonolo Lechele, who is My Vote Counts' electoral systems researcher. We will be taking you through our brief contribution today. Go to the next slide. So this is just the outline of what we will be speaking to today. My colleague is going to give a very quick introduction to what My Vote Counts is as an organization. We're making some comments on our response to the ConCourt judgment, looking at some of what we view as some of the potential positive impacts of independent candidates being included in our system. Also looking at some of what we consider to be some of the limitations, and then offering a few brief concluding remarks and recommendations. My colleague, Mr. Chelen, will now take over.
Thank you very much, Joel. I will just be giving a brief introduction to our organization, My Vote Counts. My Vote Counts was founded to improve the accountability, transparency, and inclusiveness of elections in politics in South Africa. We work to ensure that the political and electoral systems are open, fair, and accountable to the public, and that they remain relevant to the changing South African socio-political context. We produce popular education material for a clearer understanding of South Africa's political and electoral systems, and work with community-based organizations to raise awareness of these issues. We conduct research that helps to inform MVC's advocacy and popular education activities to provide an understanding of the political and electoral issues, and to provide policy alternatives for South Africa's political and electoral system based on the changing economic and socio-political context. We initiate litigation as a last resort in order to ensure that the constitutional principles of transparency, inclusiveness, and accountability remain the basis of our political and electoral systems. More specifically, our work has focused on political funding, transparency, access to information, and electoral integrity reform.
My Vote Counts is really excited about the prospect of independent candidates now being able to run at all three levels of government. And our work for many years is concentrated on deepening accountability, trying to improve the links between voters and elected officials, and put in place mechanisms to ensure that where there are problems of accountability, that they can be remedied. So the issues around political accountability have been part of conversations for decades. And almost 20 years ago, the Van Zyl-Slabbert report, the majority recommendation, found that the makeup of our system at national and provincial level did not necessarily provide for the most direct type of accountability between voters and people and elected officials. So our position is that the ConCourt judgment provides a real unique opportunity to begin remedying this. And Accountability, I think it's a word that gets bandied around so much that it often loses some of its meaning. But for us, in essence, it's the ability of people to hold those in power to account. It's the ability for people to have their voices heard, for their needs to be met, and for mechanisms to be put in place that when this is not happening, for it to be remedied. And the introduction of independent candidates at national and provincial level, we believe, does provide a really important point in our democracy, and we are very much in support of this move. The judgment, what it also does, which is also of great importance, is it provides more political choices, and both for people to stand to be elected, but also for the electorate. And in a country where for many decades the majority of our people were excluded from political life, we feel that these type of changes to our system that provide for more inclusivity are essential.
The introduction of independent candidates will have an impact on our electoral and political system. In 2019, more than 9 million of eligible voters did not register to vote. Of the 27 million registered voters, only 66% voted. So this is a decline, because in 2014, we had about 73.5 voter turnout. Now, and in 2019, we had a 66% voter turnout. So that's an 88% decline of voter turnout. One of the reasons behind the voter apathy and why we think that the impact of independent candidates will result in a reverse in voter apathy is that people feel like their votes do not make a difference. People abstain from voting because they feel that their votes do not have the power to effect the changes in the political system. There was great dissatisfaction, like a growing dissatisfaction with the choice to only vote for parties. People feel that elected representatives are only loyal to the parties that they put them in power, and hence there's a de-link between the voters and the people that have been voted into power. Another reason is that independent candidates do not belong to any party. They might encourage voters to vote for them because they are independent and have different ideas and different mandates and ideologies. So having independent candidates kind of broadens the competitive political landscape for people to have a broader choice and have a broader alternative, as opposed to what we currently have, which is, confined to political parties. So having independent candidates in the next elections might encourage voters to come back and vote for a different policy, for a different alternative. Another impact of the independent candidates is that, although we don't know what the system will be, I mean, as the commissioner just said, but the reform will result in some form of a constituency-based system where voters can vote directly for their elected representative. If anything, independent candidates kind of bring that relationship between the voter and the elected representative. So you are able to vote for the person that you can hold accountable, the person that you know, and in that way, independent candidates are more able to be accountable to the people that vote for them. This will create real constituency as opposed to artificial constituency that we have now. Currently, MPs, although they do have constituencies, but they are less likely to, have an interest or know about the constituency because they do not necessarily, live in those constituencies or have a more stronger connection. So having an elected representative that's in the same constituency that they live in will create a greater response between, how the elected representatives can kind of, escalate certain issues in that constituencies to the provincial legislature, for instance, and to the national assembly. This also speaks to the resource to constituency. If you have an elected MP that is within your constituency, that MP is able to escalate challenges that are faced in that constituency to the provincial legislature and to the National Assembly. This, will result ultimately in policy influence. Currently, there's political parties that have, I mean, so many issues to deal with. But if you have someone who you can directly connect to on a personal level and share your specific issues about a school, specific issues about service deliveries, such as water and so forth, you are able to kind of open that channel of communication to the National Assembly and make sure that your issues, your direct issues that are in that constituency are able to be heard and managed. Another impact of the introduction of the role of independent candidates is that they are not beholden to any party. You know, generally in South Africa, people vote along party lines. You know, along the history of a party, ideology, you know, and how you have voted before historically. But now with the introduction of independent candidates, people can be able to vote for an independent candidate. You know, somebody who, you know, you are technically voting for ideas. You're voting for a different mandate. You know, you're not voting because you have no choice. You know, there's now like a plethora of you know, people that you can vote for. You can vote based on what you think best suits you, the interest of the voter. So it's just kind of like a bigger pool of the people that you can vote for. I mean, and obviously, and this will also result in a more competitive political landscape. I mean, there's more people to vote for. There's more ideas and you know, and a more greater political landscape in general. Another point that we wanted to also discuss was that introduction of independent candidates will also, you know, force to an extent political parties to respond better to challenges that we currently have in South Africa. You know, because there will be such a big pool of political players. I think it will force political parties to also kind of shape up, you know, and kind of, you know, reassess how they can help South Africans and how they can function better. Because now, if you don't improve how you work and how you you know, provide service delivery, there is an alternative. So this is also indirectly a good way to kind of encourage political parties to also respond to challenges a bit better. I mean, also for independent candidates, I mean, they're not the panacea and all. I mean, we know about our challenges, but also it will also help them to kind of, you know, be able to perform better because they cannot hide under the banner of a political party. If you are an MP and you are elected representative of that constituency, you are accountable to that constituency. You cannot hide behind a party and say, no, I can't help you with this because it's a party mandate or it's because of the constituency there or there. You are directly accountable. So the people that have voted for you are the people that are there to question you on your performance, and you know, you have a greater chance of being, you know, not voted into power in the next elections because you did not provide. So it kind of keeps them on their feet to be able to provide better service for South Africans if they are directly voted by the constituency.
Thanks, Electoral.
Are you done?
Sorry, we'll wrap up very quickly. So just very quickly to speak to some of the limitations, we recognize that, you know, we already have independent candidates at local government, and this is a sphere in which issues of accountability persist. We also recognize that independents will face the challenge of having to compete against political parties who are well established, who have infrastructure, who have support, finances, research capabilities. When you look at independent candidates in other national legislatures, when you look at the UK, at Canada, at Germany, they have sort of some areas where they didn't receive one seat in the most recent elections. Other places it's generally under 1%. So we just need to be a bit circumspect. We don't anticipate that this will overnight fundamentally change the political landscape, but we also recognize that each country is different. We're really eager to see what impact independent candidates can have in the 2024 elections. Sorry, let's get on to the last screen. Sorry, and I know we're running out of time, so just to speak very quickly, as we mentioned before, we see this as an extremely important development, but we can't think it will simply overnight wipe away all our political ills. As MVC, we are quite concerned and just want to raise the awareness of issues raised by the IEC about the need for this to be done expeditiously, around the need for that will impact on their ability to prepare for and run the elections, and something which we are want to put as much emphasis on is around voter education. Ordinarily, this is a big part of the IEC's work, which I know they do alongside NGOs such as My Accounts and a number of other organizations. But with changes to the electoral system, this is going to be more important than ever. To ensure that people actually understand the voting process, if the ballots are going to be different. If we want to ensure good levels of participation, we need to put adequate resources into education. At My Accounts, we are doing that. We are running some workshops, some webinars. We are working with community-based organizations to capacitate, to raise awareness, and to encourage that they make submissions and participate in the public participation processes. And we will be doing this as well. Sorry if we took a bit too much time. Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you for the contribution. I'm going to now allow participants. They've been listening for a lot of presentation. I'm going to take participants in a form of hands. I'll start with the Chief Whip of the Majority Party. And then Honorable Chavane, then Honorable Ross. Those are the hands that I see only for now. Honorable Janji. Let's go in that sequence. Chief Whip of the Majority Party.
Thank you very much.
Yes, proceed, Chief Whip.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Let me greet all invited guests on this platform, and thank you very much for such an informative presentations that we have received this morning. Starting from the deputy speaker, all presenters were just spot on. I wish to make a preamble that as the ANC, we are fully committed on this process, because if we are to deepen multi-party democracy, this is the way to go. We appreciate and embrace this process, notwithstanding that it's going to be a little bit cumbersome. Be that as may, we are going to journey together. The spirit of optimism that has been displayed here, that it is possible that we can meet the deadline, I really appreciate that. But now, the question that one has is, the service delivery backlogs and the challenges of the country cannot be attended to and be done with through this electoral system, because the last presentation that was saying, if you have independent candidates, they'll have direct contact with their constituencies. But if you have a direct contact with the constituencies, it does not therefore mean that you will have a direct budget to yourself, because that is what is happening in the current electoral system. The reason why the deputy speaker was saying the funding or the budget must also come into fore, because now if you enter into this mixed system, which I support, how are we then going to make it a point that if I'm an independent candidate, my school, my area want a school, there is no money that is going to be allocated to me as an independent candidate that I must be able to go out and build that school. Those are some of the cons and pros that as we move forward, we're going to deal with. The time frame of 2024 if I may check with Mr. Mamabulo, will it be possible with the IEC and infrastructure to be able to include this type of a mixed system and be able to deliver elections on time? And if not, any mechanism that can be brought forward to check that if we're unable to deal with this within the 24 months, which I'm not suggesting, but should there be that abnormality? Is there anything else that can be provided as a bridging system towards ensuring that all that the court have said get expression on the new system? Thank you very much, Chair. But really, all the presenters were good, and they've given us, as political parties, a good assignment that when we go back to our parties, we must be able to engage better. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Chief Whip of the Majority Party. Honorable Chabane.
No, thanks, Chairperson, for this opportunity to contribute on these presentations. And I want to join the Chief Whip in appreciating and welcoming all the presentation that has been broad thinking that has emerged from all the presentation, Chair, including the provocative views that have been expressed by both the Deputy Speaker and Mr. Valmos. I think it gives an opportunity, Chair, to begin a conversation with our people on the ground and stakeholders that has to interact with this process of Concord judgment. I think, Chair, one of the issues that I think, because it has already been highlighted by the Deputy Speaker that, and yourself, Chair, that this is the beginning of a conversation with all the stakeholders. And what is critical emerging from the IEC presentation is on the issue around the demarcation board. And it will be important, Chair, that as we move forward, we may need to invite them to bring them into the space to understand what is their posture in relation to the issues that are emerging, particularly citing on the issues that are raised by the IEC on the delimitation of the wards. What will be the impact of this Concord judgment in terms of their work? You know that as you move towards the local government elections, in the main, demarcation board interact with the space of delimitation. So it will be important to get that framework. But I think also the IEC and the minister may perhaps labor on it, and what will be the posture in terms of the constitutional this Concord judgment. Perhaps, Chair, also to interact with the minister, to ask the minister whether are we not likely to end up redefining provinces, given that the demarcation board also will be in the space in relation to this independent candidates. Two quick questions, Chair, that I think perhaps we may need to raise. Is an obvious question that everybody will raise in a local government when an independent or a councillor resign or any other issue arises for his not being a councillor or candidate. Now that will be entering the provincial legislatures and local government, National Assembly. What will happen when such occurrence happen, where either an independent candidate resign or any other thing happen? What is the reflection, particularly to ISA in terms of their priorities, that they've options that they've highlighted? And I'm interested on the studies that have been conducted in some of the countries in relation to that space. The last point, Chair, is on my vote count. I think they are expressively defining the roles of the candidates. both on the strengths and weaknesses. What is the study? Have they done a study in terms of evaluating the role of independent candidates, in particular in line with the accountability to their constituency? What is the study that has been drawn? I'm trying to say what are the lessons, Chair, and the shortcomings around our independent candidates that have participated since the introduction of this legislation. But General Chair, I think we appreciate the work, and I think it will be important that in the next session we extend to other stakeholders, including the demarcation board on this area. Thank you, Chairperson.
No, thank you very much, Honorable Chaban. Honorable Maleb. Oh, Honorable Ross. I see you are demanding this lot.
Thank you, Chairperson. And yeah, thank you for this forum. I think it's tremendously valuable. And greetings to all the distinguished delegates. I found the presentations really brought a lot of very salient points to mind. I'm just going to mention one or two points on each. First of all, I'd like to agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Vali Musa that today's opposition parties will be tomorrow's ruling party. And that today's ruling party will be tomorrow's opposition party.
I'm not referring to you, not referring to you, you'll never.
Dreamland. I agree wholeheartedly. But what I also agree with is when Mr. Musa says, we need to do this right. It's very important that we don't rush it, that we do it right. It is something, I think it's going to be a legacy that we all leave over many, many years. And the Deputy Speaker raised a critical point, in terms of identifying proactively challenges, but also bringing the point home that we really need to make sure that we engage, that there's public participation in this and that it's meaningful public participation, so that it's not something that we develop around this table, but that we really have the views of a diversity of South Africans. So really, this public participation must be key and central in this whole process. The minister correctly raises the dangers of, systems where, even in South Africa, we saw in 1948 that we had D.F. Malan coming in, despite having 12% less of the popular vote. And so certainly that's something that the DA agrees with. We should never have a system where you can come in on a minority vote by yourself and have a parliament that is not representative of the diversity of South Africa. In terms of the EISA, I found that presentation very interesting. I'd also be interested to understand, you look at the STV, single transferable vote, and whether this has been successful or not. I think it can be considered quite a complex way of voting. I think it would be good for us to understand that a bit better, how it's been implemented in other countries, how voter education has gone around that, and whether it's been successful or not. And then finally, just a comment on the My Vote Counts presentation. I think it's an important point that that candidates, they shouldn't feel that they're voting for a stuck list or that they do not have a choice in it. And certainly, I think it's important, whether it's independent candidates or political parties. Certainly, the idea of open lists where people can choose their public representative, even though they're part of a party. It's another important point to consider. Thank you, Chairperson.
No, thank you, Ross. Members, we are requested to unmute your video when you speak. So please do that. Honorable Modise. In the absence of Modise, the hand was up. Let's take Dr. PJ Funnevat.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Chair, firstly, from my side, I want to say that I think it was the right thing to have a workshop and I know that this is not going to be the last. And as Mr. Wali Musa has said, there will be ample time for political parties and other institutions to participate in this process. And I think that is a very important aspect that we must keep in mind, because participation in the process is very important to ensure that in the end that we have an electoral system that serves South Africa. Having said that, Chairperson, I just want to emphasize certain aspects. Firstly, we must bear in mind what Section 46 of the Constitution determines, namely that the result in general should be proportional. That is a challenge, and that is a constitutional, precondition when we talk about electoral systems. Chairperson, there's one thing I also think that we must focus on, and that is the accountability. And I want to put it very clearly and straightforward here today that we must not mislead ourselves to think that an electoral system will ensure more accountability. And that has also been adopted by the Van Zyl-Slabbert, the Electoral Task Team report. It was actually a consensus decision from the Van Zyl-Slabbert report that an electoral system as such cannot ensure more accountability. When we talk about accountability, we must understand, and we must also educate the voters that they understand that accountability is that the electorate have an opportunity to change the candidates, the representatives, every 5 years when there is an election. I hear about independent candidates. I welcome independent candidates. The fact of the matter is that to just say that those candidates and those elected as independents will be more accountable to the electorate, I differ on that. Because you can have an independent candidate, but he or she is elected. The next election is only over 5 years. And what accountability does that representative have towards the electorate different from what the political parties have? Because each and every one wants to be re-elected at the next election. Political parties, in fact, they don't only want to be re-elected, they want to become the next government. They want to grow. Where independent candidates or representatives, they only wanted to be re-elected. And the fact of the matter is that if, for instance, an independent candidate, he or she does not perform, nothing can happen to that specific representative. He or she can do nothing till the next election, cannot be removed or anything. Whereas when it is a representative of a political party, if he or she does not perform, then the party can take disciplinary actions, remove the representative and put someone else in it. So we must not be misled by the buzzword of accountability and think that a change in electoral system will ensure that there is more accountability. Therefore, Chairperson, I understand that we will have long discussions. Everybody agrees that we will have to change. Yeah, there's a couple of other people who also want to change now, who are not muted. I don't know whether you can still hear me. But what I want to say, Chair, can you just get more, please?
Ismalisela, Chair.
Chairperson, unmute.
Thank you, Chair. What I want to say is that I think we will have to apply our minds to that. I want to conclude by saying electoral systems are very complex. It's one thing to talk about constituencies, and I fully agree. There's no way that we can move to an electoral system of first past the post. In South African history, there were 4 times where the government governed with a minority. It was in 1910, 1929, 1948, and 1953. And it is not different to South Africa as far as other regions in the world is concerned. In the UK, we have similar situations, and we saw those examples. So there's no way we can move back to that. I think in the end, we will end up with a mixed system. But then we must remember, Chairperson, and that will be the focus areas. Firstly, we must also acquaint ourselves with the electoral formula that's going to be applicable, because that is a very important part to determine how many seats a political party can get in a legislature. So it is a complex matter, and we will all have to do our homework on that. But I think forward to a process where we can all engage, that we get a system, electoral system in the end, that complies to the Constitution, as Mr. Bali Musa has said, but also ensure that we still build and unite in South Africa as all peoples, as South Africans. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Groenewald. I think we are raising quite important points, because now you remind me of what section 1 of the Constitution. You know, the last sentence there speaks about universal suffrage, common voters' roll, and it says it must be a multi-party democracy. So we've got to engage all those kind of sections and check what do they really mean, and what envisaged, and how do we move forward. Can we take Chwako? In the absence of the, let's take Honorable Pile.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I think for me, let me just.
Thank you very much.
Who's speaking now? We are not audible. We are not audible.
Sorry, I'm in a very bad, but mine is very short. Patience.
We can't benefit.
Chair, can I allow him to speak and then I'll come back?
Yes, let's leave him to the Honorable Pile. But I can't hear him. Chwako? In view of the fact that we can't hear you, Chwako, let's take you, Pile.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Let me firstly congratulate you as the Chair and the committee for this workshop. I think it's very important in the discussions and deliberations that we need to take on this matter. Chair, I'm partly covered by Honorable Tabane in terms of the vacancies, and I think that for me is an important point to raise. Because what you find is that with local government and councillors, when there is a vacancy that arises, it goes to a by-election. So what then will happen in the case of provincial and national delegates? If they are independents and one passes away or resigns, deal with those vacancies and filling in of vacancies, does that constituency will remain without a representative until the next election, or does that mean we go to a by-election? And then the other one that for me I think was important was the last presentation by My Vote Counts, where they were talking about constituencies members being more accountable. And I wanted to draw the comparison to a ward councillor who's already there taking care of a constituency at a local level. How would we draw the line in terms of responsibilities by a local ward councillor based in a ward and now a member of parliament in terms of legislature or national? Because the issue of service delivery around local government lies with a local councillor at a ward level. And how then would you differentiate the roles between the two at a local level? But I love the discussion and the engagements, and I'm sure that by the time this process reaches finality, we would have got all the views of everyone to be able to make an informed decision. And I must say that the process of consultation must now move, and we must start taking it to a broader audience so that we're able to reach the right decision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Swart.
Chairperson.
Yes, Mr.
I'm here, but you
yes,
just
you're
left
here,
me.
but we can't hear you in the system. So it's like multiplying your own efforts by 0 because you are speaking to yourself. We can't hear you in the system. Do you want to continue that being the case?
Are you able to hear me now, or you can't?
I hear you now, but you disappear.
Yeah, okay. Can you give me a chance after the other member?
Okay, I'll give you a chance. Just stand in a place where we can reach you.
Can you please continue?
Honorable Swart, you'll come after Swart.
Thank you, Advocate Bongo. It's good to see you again, and to the Portfolio Committee and the Select Committee, the Minister and Mr. Vali Musa. Thank you. Just a few comments. I understand there'll be later inputs from parties. There could also be connection problems in that regard. So I just want to thank you for arranging this workplace. I notice my connection is not that stable. So I'm going to if you can't hear me, I'll turn off my video. But very briefly, I think it's very key for us to understand what Mr. Vali Musa indicated this morning, and that is whilst we are looking to do something for the nation going forward for 30, 50 years. And whilst we, from our perspective of the ACDP, we appreciate the proportional list system, proportional representation. Had it not been for that, we would probably not be in Parliament. And I'm very appreciative of the commitment that seems to be broadly accepted that there's not going to be a constitutional amendment. There's no time for that. That means that we will keep a system that is, in general, proportional. I am acutely aware of time constraints as well for us to do this legislative reform, as indicated by the IEC, and of course the issues relating to the demarcation board. I appreciate the Constitutional Court's ruling about independent candidates, and that opens the ground, but we need to learn what has happened at local government level. So I like the input. Can we look into that, the experience at local government level? How does one hold your local independent candidates accountable? And so, Chair, thank you. From my perspective, I look forward to engaging further in this regard, I was part of the Funsel Stubborn Commission, looking into those aspects. So there is a lot of work that we can already build on, but I appreciate your commitment to further this. This is very crucial. As was indicated, this goes to the heart of our constitutional democracy. Thank you, Chairperson, from my perspective.
Thank you, Honorable Swart. Honorable Mpine?
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Myself, thank you very much, everyone. I think for the presentation, very informative. But it looks as if, Chairperson, there's a move in a very slow, snail pace. We are in this crisis here, constitutional crisis, because of the inefficiencies of the ruling party. That includes yourself as well, because last time when that report came in 2003, it says that there must be, that report from the Fanzale, SLAB, it's supposed to be implemented, and that report collected dust. So we're back into square one. I hope that we are not going to get back to same square one again. We must move with speed to ensure that we finish this amendment and the correction of the Electoral Act before the 2 years actually ends. So we as the EFF, we do welcome the Constitutional Court, the judgment. And yes, as you said, that we are participating and we're going to participate in the discussions which are going to actually, that are going to happen. Now, one question that I wanted to ask, maybe the presenters, is that in the system itself, it must make sure that number one, it is actually constituency centered. It serves the needs of the constituencies. And number two, it must make sure that it's tamper proof, because currently we're having a situation where these elections, we have a feeling that they're actually being rigged. It's then as the EFF is actually growing steadily more and more, we are finding many things, many loopholes that are threatening our democracy here. So we hope that this system will make sure that it is actually tamper-proof. We are going to make a submission on Thursday on the NPLC, on the way that the registration are being actually handled around the whole country. And also, we want to check as well in terms of on the new system that we're actually going to put in, the independence in terms of the payments. You remember the last times that we're saying that there's a lot of fees which are being paid by political parties to contest these elections. So we hope that the independents will not going to pay ridiculous amounts to a point where they can't even able, to contest those elections. So the fee in terms of the registration must be very small, and the requirements must be to such an extent that it's not going to hamper or hinder an adult, the citizens to be able to actually take part on the election. And the last one, Chairperson, I think that is also the opportunity for the researchers and for us as well to consider the synchronizing of the elections. So want to check if maybe as we are doing this exercise, to look as well, if we combine these elections, will this system be fine as well? So we should be working towards of actually combining the national election and the local government election. Maybe this formula that we want to use, it will be much easier when we combine all the elections from national, provincial, and the local municipality than to have them actually split. And also, I agree with member Chaban that we must get the demarcation board, the demarcation on board, so that we see in terms of the demarcation, in terms of the constituencies, the proposal of the constituencies, how are they going to be like, and how are they, constituted, and all of that. Maybe in the next workshop that we might have to have. Now let us develop a policy document. There must be a policy document now. Not our presentations, let's say a proposal now from the task team that will now be giving us real numbers, real, an example, real examples. But this is the current scenario that is happening. We have so many members. This is now a system that we want to actually, to propose in terms mixed system, proportionality system, and all of that. And then also, they can be technical as much as they want. Some of us are mathematicians, will understand that. So we want to have an addendum that shows these calculations. How would you be able to calculate that? So in the next meeting, we would like to have now a policy document, a document that we can be talking to now. This is the current, this is what now we are proposing moving forward. And let us move with speed. No more the presentations now and the talk shops. Let's get into the road part, into the roadmap, and make sure that we do this thing properly. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mtini. And Risner?
I hope you have forgotten me, Chair.
I'm not at all.
Chairperson, thank you very, very much. And may I join those who have congratulated yourself and also the excellent inputs that have been delivered at this workshop. I think it's very timeous, very, very important. Chair, I think really Parliament is confronted with two main imperatives. Firstly, the Constitutional Court has spoken. It's pronounced itself clearly in favor of the right of independent candidates to stand for political office at a national and a provincial level. And Parliament must respond to that judgment and give effect to it. And it must do so quickly, timeously, and in a manner that is workable. On the other hand, the judgment does give rise indirectly to questions around whether our electoral system more broadly requires reform or change. And I think that is a very, very complex matter that Parliament must deal with speedily, yes, but also in a manner that is thorough, that is well researched and evidence-based, and I think most importantly, involves the whole of South African society in that discussion, because it lies at the heart of our constitutional democracy. And in saying that, I think we need to emphasize up front that there's no immediate correlation between an electoral system and the attainment of a variety of objectives. Yes, an electoral system can act to facilitate the attainment of those objectives, but putting in place, for example, constituencies is not going to result automatically in and of itself in greater accountability. And I think whilst the question of accountability is absolutely crucial and it's a fundamental constitutional value, it must be looked at in the context of a range of other fundamental constitutional values and objectives. Our Constitution commits us to the building of a united, non-racial, non-sexist, and democratic society. Now, the question then is, does the electoral system contribute to each one of those objectives? Does a constituency system, for example, promote a non-sexist society? Does a constituency system help forge a non-racial and a united society? It might, but it might also lead to certain complications. And I think Parliament and society generally needs to debate those matters very, very thoroughly. An electoral system must also contribute to the building of an effective developmental state. And recently, the introduction of the district development model has sought to unite the efforts of national, provincial, and local spheres. How does an electoral system contribute to that? The question of political and social inclusivity and the stability of our society were factors that weighed very, very heavily with the drafters of our Constitution, and in particular, the insistence that any electoral system must result ultimately or generally in a proportional outcome to ensure the widest possible inclusion. Again,
the system that we adopt, are those concerns still relevant? And would an electoral system based, for example, on constituencies still give effect to that? I think we must also bear in mind that our society is still burdened with the extremely destructive and painful effects of the legacy of apartheid spatial planning that has also led to the link between geography, race, and ethnicity. Any electoral system that we adopt must take into account those realities and ask the question whether the electoral system reinforces that painful historic legacy or helps us overcome and move beyond it. And I think last, or almost in conclusion, I think whatever system we come up with would need to follow the principles outlined in the Electoral Task Team report, the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission. It would need to result in proportionality. It would need to be easily understood, easily applicable, and generally operate in a fair manner. I think the last question to ask is, whilst the Constitutional Court has pronounced on the question of independent candidates, and the colleagues from My Vote Count have delivered a very impassioned representation or argument for the merits of independent candidates. I think we also need to ask the question whether the individualization of our politics is necessarily the unadulterated virtue that some argue it is. When we've seen in many other countries in the world a fragmentation, almost in a sense a depoliticization of our politics, a move away from parties that are able to advance coherent transformative agendas, to a politics which is very individual centered, and very often very susceptible to the influence of money and vested interests. And I think that brings me to my last point, which is that internationally, democracy and representative politics has been undergoing a legitimacy crisis in the past few years. And so any debate around an appropriate electoral system going forward would need to answer the question of how it assists in ensuring the legitimacy of our own and safeguarding the legitimacy of our own system. Lastly, just on a lighter note, and because Mr. Groenewald and I were on the benches together for 25 years, I can't resist taking a shot. I'm sure he won't take it personally. He says that there were 4 occasions on which South Africa in the past where a government governed with a minority. I thought that was the government by a minority lasted for much more than 4 times. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Janji.
No, thank you very much, Chair. I thought you'd forgotten about it. Thank you. Chair, I'm largely covered by many speakers who have spoken before me, but I have a number of issues that I just want to add. And I want to start with yourself. You have set a tone up front, and I want to thank you for that. In the way you have put forward this fundamental template and criteria, because you've posed a question that doesn't matter what ideas we have and the creativity we'll bring on board, but whatever that we are going to bring on board must meet a certain test. You've put that test, and that test has been echoed by the Deputy Speaker Chairperson Vali Musa, as well as Andries Nel now, when you said that this electoral reform process that we're embarking on must be a non-racial in its outlook, non-sexist, democratic. It must assist in building a prosperous society. That for me is very fundamental. I want to commit from the governing party that we're going to watch that with a hawk's eyes, that as we travel this journey, the outcome of this journey must be able to reflect that template you painted up front, which is also what is in our constitution. I think veteran Vali Musa has echoed that with you, but also added and said what the exercise was starting is an opportunity for a new electoral system that has longevity and durability. And I want to add those two, that whatever longevity and durability, it must answer your template. I like what he also said about elections being a political matter. This is our work. And as we start today, in his words, we are dealing with what was a temporary measure which became permanent. He has really assisted a lot of us when he explained why in 1993-94 an electoral system could not be established. And in the way he has explained the pressures that were there at the time to have democracy born. We want to thank you for that. If I were to go to ISA, Chair, just two issues on ISA. I think the first one, he's raising quite important issues around issues of gender representativity. I think he fell short in the South African context to really explain and demonstrate that this issue of gender parity as a result of the PR, because he said it's at the discretion of parties. I thought he would go further, but I didn't want to say that myself, that the ANC is leading in that regard in terms of the 50-50 arrangement. And I want him to indicate whether should we not institutionalize that kind of an imperative. So it goes beyond a discretion of political parties. It becomes an important issue. IEC, just to go through that, I want to thank them for presenting a pragmatic input here, because that input by IEC is so practical that it has given us, Chair, the key elements of our integrated roadmap. And I want to invite veteran Vali Musa here and the Deputy Speaker to say, in your input, you indicated that we're likely to meet this deadline within the allocated time. But if we're to be responding to what the IEC has presented here, we have a lot of work in front of us. And I think that must influence the kind of work that we do going forward. I agree with Chabane that the demarcation board must be incorporated as part of our roadmap and all of these discussions. I want to end, the Chair, with the last presentation, my vote count. Musa Chabane is asking them if they've done a research. I want to change that question so that we become kind to my vote count. I want to ask them to go and do a comprehensive research. I want to ask them to go and do a comprehensive research, because I am of the view that, because I want to problematize what they've put on the table. I'm of the view that their basis for their articulation and some of their conclusion is itself a bit problematic for me. Let me start with what I call this 9 million house. You know, these 9 million voters who have not voted, because they are making a very wrong notion and a narrow notion, in my view, to argue that These 9 million voters, all they need are independent candidates. If you have independent candidates, you're likely to have them voting. I beg to disagree with them, because the research they need to go and do is to go and unpack that 9 million voters. Because when they do that, they are going to find, Chairperson, that actually in that 9 million voters, they are going to find very committed voters who are voting for parties, who are angry with these parties, who are not interested in any other party than the party they are angry with, who are not interested in any independent candidate. They chose to stay at home. That's one category of that 9 million voters. And then your other categories is in relation to the systems issues. You've got voters there that have gone tired about problems in our system, whether it is issues of voter registration, whether it is issues of ID cards and all of those issues, and whether it's issues of them not wanting to be crowded. And the third element, when they do and they dig in that 9 million, they would find, was I'd want them to categorize it, that geographically you're going to find that 9 million, majority of them, in your poor communities, many of them informal settlements, and so on. So it's going to be important that we do that, because they make that point. But when they refer to local government, where they are independent as we speak, they go very quietly there, because I would want them to go back and do that research that says how many independents, if, for example, in 2016, registered for the elections, and how many of those registered independents actually made it at the polls, so that we don't proceed from the premise that, and they make this point, that there's a panacea to solve our problem, because the problems are much complicated, are much deeper than just independent candidates. So instead of what my colleague Musa asked them, I actually want to ask them to go back and assist us in this process by doing a more detailed research that is going to assist us, because we have a mixed system already in local government. As Isa pointed out, it has got its own challenges, and they need to pick up those and not just transfer this wishful notion that this judgment, all it is about the independent candidates. I want to pause there, Chair. Thank you very much for the time.
No, thank you very much, Honorable Chanchi. I thought you were the last one. Now I see a hand. But let me give him a benefit of doubt. And from there, let's line up 2-minute responses from all those who presented. And from there, we'll get the chairperson of the select committee to do final remarks.
go along with it. So the culture in that particular country must be intolerant to corruption, must be intolerant to lack of service delivery, must be intolerant to non-challenge and laziness. That culture is the one that will carry the day, not just by saying we are putting independence, because you do find them all over the continent of Africa.
Thank you.
Chairperson, the last issue mentioned by Honorable Janji, that the judgment is not only about independence, is right. I've just mentioned here that paragraph 15, the judge started with it because he was actually warning us that even though it's not part of what is on the table, the issue of Parliament looking at the electoral system is very, very important, and that must be taken as part of the judgment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Vali Musa.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. The first observation I want to make is that even though the political parties, people from the political parties that have spoken here, are not necessarily putting forward actual proposals from their parties, the sense that I'm left with is that we are not really, that there's a high degree of convergence between the political parties on this question. And that underlines a thought that I have had up to now, that much thinking has already gone into this matter. And you would have seen from the minister's presentation this morning that quite clearly the government and the minister has really applied his mind to this question and has done quite a great deal of work. So I'm very pleased about that, which makes me feel that that we will be able to do what Honourable Janji has asked, whether we're taking into account the IEC's needs when I had said that we should try to meet the timeframes of the Constitutional Court. I got a feeling that we can do that we can meet the requirements of the Constitutional Court. We should ask ourselves, if we have more time, are we going to come to different conclusions? So I think we can do that. It was interesting to hear what Mr. Mgcini Chwaku had said, that the committee should put forward an actual proposal. We are not ready to do that right now, but we may not be very far from doing that. I understand what is being said, that then you've got something to chew on. The things that I think it's quite clear that there isn't much debate on. But before I go to that, let me just mention something about independence. Whatever we come up with is going to make room for independent candidates. But I get a sense that political parties are a little concerned that they may be overwhelmed by independents. Quite clearly, the outcome will have to be in general proportional, as everybody has said, so there's no question about it. The minister has made that clear also, and that the system must be simple and easy to understand. So simplicity is another thing that would guide us. But if a political party is concerned that its candidate cannot win against an independent, I'm not sure that that kind of consideration in the end should influence the electoral system we come up with. I really don't think so. And I really don't think that independence can overwhelm political parties, because no independent is going to have the facility of a political party, the intellectual facility, the organizational facility, the ideological capability, and generally the impact in society. I think political parties will have a head start, like they should, frankly, because our constitutional order assumes the existence of sustainable and proper political parties. Without political parties, I really don't think that our democracy can function properly. These are the institutions that hold together our democratic order and our democratically elected legislatures. It's political parties. So we mustn't do anything that's going to, in a sense, lead to the destruction of political parties. I think that's something that certainly from my side I'm going to be looking at very closely. Let me say lastly that this is a time for boldness, and it is going to take courage, certainly from the part of political parties that have participated in elections up to now. To change the electoral system is going to be an act of courage. That's what it needs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Asa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will only address the direct comments or queries that were addressed to me. Firstly, to Honourable Modina, you asked an important question about the funding of constituency development, and for that I would refer you to examples in Kenya and in Zambia currently, where an amount of money is appropriated by Parliament into constituency development funds, and those funds are dispersed according to a particular developmental formula. And this is the way in which candidates in the constituencies are able to address the demands in their particular community. So I can refer you to that. There was a couple of queries by Honorable Mosa and Pillay about the vacancy issue in such systems. And when the vacancy is created on the party side, it's very easy. The party replaces the candidate. Of course, you were referring to the constituency seats themselves. And it would occur in the same way as we currently replace vacancies at the local government level in South Africa with by-elections organized at a particular moment. Now, this does bring into question when there are issues of proportionality in play, but these are just some of the challenges with the mixed member proportional system in any case. So it's still a by-election by and large when there are constituency candidates who vacate their seats for whatever reason. I think Honourable Ruas was asking about the single transferable vote system. Let me just say that ISA has a number of experts who are happy to engage the parties bilaterally or engage the committee again at any time to go into detail about any particular system. Simply to say that the STV system is probably one of the most complex systems that you can use. A country that uses it and believes it works successfully is Australia. But there are people who believe that both mathematically and politically, the system has got some flaws. I believe that there was a comment by Honourable Janchi, who was pointing out that the ANC has led with regards to gender representativity. I concur with that assessment. The ANC has historically performed the best in terms of representation in Parliament, and it is certainly something that we acknowledge when we speak to other parliaments who come to South Africa to learn about why our system tends to do better at promoting gender parity inside of Parliament. As for whether or not it's time to institutionalize that, that's not within my realm to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. IEC.
Thank you, Chairperson. There was just one question asked by Honourable Majodina, and the question was, given this best situation roadmap, what if anything wrong happens and we are not able to meet the deadline of 2024? I want to point out that this is really not a matter with us. We are guided in that respect by Section 49 of the Constitution that clearly determines the term of the National Assembly to be 5 years with an election that must be held 90 days within the expiry of that term. In the event that the timeframes that we have painted become difficult, I imagine that Parliament would be the place that then deals with that. We do not deal with postponements, and we do not proclaim the elections. They are in fact proclaimed by the president in this instance, and so that arrangement would need to be dealt with elsewhere. Safe to say that it does create a constitutional challenge. Anything that would be held outside of the 90-day period, as required in the Constitution, I imagine can be a crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My vote count.
Thank you.
I'm not sure how we're going to separate now the time, because it's just 2 minutes.
1 minute each.
I'll be super quick. Thank you, Chair. To respond to Honorable Chabani's question, we have not done our own study. We've been looking at other jurisdictions and looking at political analysis in South Africa and what their assessment has been. We recognize it will be different in our country with its own dynamics, but we were raising some of the potential issues, and we intentionally didn't make it definitive, but we're raising potential impacts which we thought were worthy of taking note of as it gets incorporated into our system. To respond to Honorable Pillay, our answer is around drawing the line between ward councillors and then provincial. I think it will be based on the competencies, so things like water, sanitation, which remain at a local level, and then issues around transport, school, health, which will be at a provincial level. And then lastly, to respond to Honorable Janji. So again, we didn't claim it would be a panacea, an overnight turnaround of the system. We're fully in agreement with that. We also know that 9 million voters definitely won't go to the polls immediately once independent candidates are available to vote for. But we think it definitely will have the potential to bring more people back into the political arena to be politically active. And we agree it would be worthwhile to do some research to see the extent of this and the relationship between voter apathy and the potential of independent candidates. Thank you, Chair.
You are muted, Chair. You are muted.
No, there's a sabotage. I think it's Adam and Ed who are muting. Lhlahonolo, do you want to say something?
No, thank you, Chair. I've been covered by my colleague. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Chairperson of the Select Committee, Ms. Sheikh.
Thank
She has indicated that apparently struggling with the network.
Okay. No, then it's fine.
Okay, no, thank you.
We are in now.
No, it was with Honorable Bartlett, but it's fine, Chair. I think Mr. Sheikh have a problem. Honorable Sheikh has a problem with the connecting.
Okay. No, thank you very much. I'm sure that we've spent the best part of the morning taking the presentation. And from where I'm sitting, I am better educated. There's something I've learned. And I want to, I'll give a challenge to what Comrade Valimusa says, that if you take another presentation next week, would you think of something different? So I'm sure I'll check maybe in our next set of a workshop. I agree with you, Comrade Van, that the political parties did not raise their proposals. But this workshop is divided into two. We're going to get the afternoon session. We will not proceed with it. It was for two reasons. It was one reason is the week which we are busy with. The two is that we have not received the proposals by yesterday of the parties, so that we exchange them and be able to fly them in this system, so that we interact with them. But we'll get the new dates sooner and proceed with a workshop in the form where we put it, where political parties themselves will be getting into the nuts and bolts of what they think is in the best interest of the population of South Africa. But like I said, we also accept that you will take a meeting, consultation. You know, the technique of decision making lies in consultation. So we would watch those things, those movements very close from where we're sitting. But I am encouraged by the zeal that we're at least moving from one foundation, the basis of what brought our constitution together, the basis of what brought the electoral system that we do have now. It has constitutional challenges, by the way, but it has not been challenged by the electorate itself. That is why in dealing with whatever the Constitutional Court has said, you've got to take the electorate together, because they themselves participate, they themselves want to have a say on how they would want to vote for their public representatives. So I hear Honorable Twako says we must rush. There's a need that we must use speed, but we can't rush so that we were able to comply with what Vali Musa says, that longevity and durability of the process that we want to put up must be a yardstick against which we measure the work that we do. So we must not put a lot of pressure on our shoulders to a level where we just want to rush. We've got to apply our minds in a manner that takes us forward. And the system that we need to deal with, it must be in a position to play a role in transforming the economic system of this country and transforming the society itself. So that is why we brought this team of expert minister to assist us, assist Parliament, assist the parties, assist everyone to come up with what is in the best interest of the country. The roadmap that we have set as Parliament, that roadmap that we have set, we are going to fit in this work. We're going to fit in this work so that we're able to move seamlessly without being shaken by anything. And I agree that there's a lot of work that we have put, but it's not in one piece of a document. There's a piece there, there's a piece there. So we need now to bring all the work that has been put together. But there is a issue around the demarcation board raised by Honorable Chavan. We're getting into the next phase to involve all those stakeholders that the Deputy Speaker also mentioned, that we need to bring everyone, State South Africa and so on, because this conversation is not a simple conversation. It's the one that needs our people that directly talk to them about this, and at the same time ensuring that all of us as political parties and stakeholders were able to move from one page. If we're able to do that successfully, I'm sure we'll live up to delivering something that is going to be very durable, something that will be in the interest of future generation, because whatever we do now, we must have the same foresight that Oliver Tambo and Nelson Mandela had. Because in their entire course of struggle that they engaged in, they always were looking for the solutions for future generations of South Africa. So I think we ourselves are benefiting from those fruits, but we need to replicate the same. Whatever we do, the foresight must not be lost. It must be looking at the future generations of our people that whatever decision we take, it's in the interest of those who will be living in the next 50 to 100 years. And once we have that foresight, I think would have also emulated Oliver Tambo and Nelson Mandela in their quest of building a country that was meant to be united and prosperous. I think with those words, we can close the workshop and dirty our boots now and wait for the next leg of the workshop and start from there. But take note that the train has left and it is using a speed of a mirage. But whilst we are not rushing anything, thank you very much, participants. The workshop stands adjourned.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Chair.
Is there no later this afternoon after the sitting? Is that cancelled?
It is cancelled after the sitting.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that clarity.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a great day. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.